tell you that this altar is so meaningful, not only in San Francisco, but the globe. Internationally, this is the first altar of multi-women. Most altars, most memorials are one, either Korean or two in China, Korean and Chinese. This is the first altar we have 4 girls, Chinese, Korean, and Filipino, and of course, Haksu Kim, who broke the silence in 1991.
When we came up to the idea of doing this altar, I said, I'm not an artist, and so I got 3 artists to work with me. So Aurora Mamea, she worked all week on putting together this beautiful altar that signifies the many missing and murdered Indigenous women that are across Turtle Island and Canada. And in here it symbolizes all of the different medicines that come from 4 directions of the places. It wasn't until 2014 that President Obama actually signed a law that made it illegal for people to basically hunt Native women on reservations and not have to deal with consequences because they were non-Native men that were doing it. 1 out of 3 Indigenous women are raped every year, and so for me as a mother of 2 young women, that hits close to home. There are thousands of Native women that are lost, and no one's looking for them. And so when our land is taken advantage of, when our land is raped, the same thing happens to women's bodies all over the world. One of the things that we were taught in ceremony was that it is now the time for women to stand in their rightful place in this world. That it is time for us to stand in our power. It is time for us to stand not as equals but as partners with the men that are in this world. It is time for us to have the voice for our sisters and our aunties and our grandmothers and our mothers and our daughters and our granddaughters.
I'm honored to be here to introduce my altar. Out of all many Korean women whose case made ignite Korean women's movement and peace movements, I've chosen these 4 women, and one is Kim Hak-soon, and you saw the statue of her over there, and there are 2 Korean teenagers, and one of the Korean employee of a Korean club. So Kim Hak-soon was the first woman who broke the silence and testified about her experience as a comfort woman. As the first one to share her story, she helped to bring to the public's attention the issue of Japanese sex slavery during the World War II. Her testimony inspired courage in other victims, prompting them to open up about their own wounds and pain. Their courage became the starting point to uncovering the hidden history. And Shin Hyo-san and Shin Mi-san were schoolgirls. On June 13, 2002, they were walking on a public road in Gyeonggi-do in South Korea like any other days. At the same time, a United States Army armored vehicle lounge bridge was returning to its base in Ujeongbu, entering the public road where ordinary pedestrians walk. Without carefully looking out for the pedestrians, it struck, smashed, and drove over these teenage girls' bodies. However, the American soldiers involved were found not guilty of negligent homicide in the court-martial.
They documented US military crimes of violence. They researched old news reports, official records, local histories, and people's testimonies to compile this timeline, which starts in 1945 and goes on to the current time. So there are lots of little stories here. I'd just like to read a couple very briefly. Starting in 1945, several months after first US forces land on Zamami Island, women are abducted, carried to the deserted seacoast areas, raped, and then let go. 1946, a 47-year-old woman is walking along the road with her husband when 4 GIs in a truck stop and block their way. They carry the wife off to Yomitan village where the 4 GIs rape her. Moving on, 1950, a 23-year-old woman who is walking in Naha City is abducted from behind. A 65-year-old woman is on her way to work in the fields. A 23-year-old woman is watching the house in Motobo. A 31-year-old woman is digging potatoes with her brother-in-law. A 20-year-old woman and her friend are talking as they walk along the road. And this carries on with many more of these stories. Many of these crimes are not reported. One woman identified in the film, living along the fence line there, as Yumi Tomita, could only talk about her ordeal years later. She said, "I knew I had to find a way to speak out, as other women couldn't." Nearly 2 years ago, Rina Shimabukuro was raped and murdered by a former US military man. Several of us, Debbie, Corina, and myself, went to an international women's gathering in Okinawa last June, and we visited a public altar created where her body was found.
And another altar to the victims of drone violence in the Middle East and in North Africa. And it's self-explanatory. Look at it and gather meaning from it and say a prayer for the victims of drone violence everywhere. And thank you for being here.
Whenever I speak in public, I always start by acknowledging that we're meeting on stolen land, so I want to appreciate your opening and the prayer and the acknowledgement of whose land we're on here. The occupation of Palestine is the epitome of a colonizing entity stealing a people's land, occupying the land and oppressing and exerting control over the people of that land, and attempting to appropriate the culture of that land and that people. The women of Palestine engage in what you see, the word here, sumud. That's the Arabic word for steadfastness. So this altar honors their spirit of steadfastness, and that they exhibit that by continuing to exist in the face of an entity that is constantly foisting destruction on them. This particular International Women's Day, 62 Palestinian women and girls hang on to their sumud in Israeli prisons. 9 of them were shot and injured. 17 of them are mothers, and 6 of them are minors. Probably the most well-known girl arrested is Ahed Tamimi, and you see her here, and you see her in a couple other altars here today. She was snatched from her home in the wee hours at the age of 16 last December, and she turned 17 in Israeli prison. Now, today is March 10th, and tomorrow on March 11th is when Ahed is scheduled to go on trial before an Israeli military court. That court has a 99.7% rate of conviction of Palestinians.
We have here actually, it's photographs, and you know that the comfort women have been protesting for a number of years, it's several decades. So we actually have women, these are the Korean women. If you look here, this is a woman, and it's very clearly written, I'm a fighter. Alongside is the panels of photographs of the Chinese comfort women. And this is from the museum that they just opened up in China, and there's over 600 photographs there.
My altar is in the image of a Japanese Buddhist shrine, and I have an image of Buddha in the middle here with photos of comfort women from many countries, and representing kind of compassion for these women and how they suffered under the Japanese government. I think the other thing I wanted to express with my altar is that the whole issue of the comfort women was very controversial. The erection of the memorial in the Japanese American community, and I'm here as a Japanese American to say that I am in solidarity with the comfort women. And the other part that I try to express here is that, you know, the Japanese government and Japanese corporations have never been a friend of Japanese Americans.
Down here, I don't want to leave out, this is actually boxes and altars that were made by students at UCB. They made them in particular to stop killing trans women. It's a major issue that they feel is often overlooked, and actually a lot of the young women that have been killed, and they just have disappeared from our, you know, the public's eye. So this is their tribute to them.
This altar is dedicated to migrant women at the border. We honor the 1 in 7 persons in the world who is an international or internal migrant. We honor women today who are facing the hard reality of forced migration.
Forced by the lack of jobs, hiring discrimination against women over 30, failed government policies to ensure dignified work and decent wages at factories, sewing t-shirts and teddy bears.
Forced by the contamination of lands by international mining and land evictions to grow export crops.
Unable to feed their children, pay their school fees, buy shoes, and her only option is to seek work elsewhere, the bigger city or the next rich country, which will pay 10 times what she would earn in a day at home.
Forced to migrate because of violence from intimate partners or strangers who target trans, lesbian, gay, and women's bodies, or hired assassins who try to intimidate her to keep quiet, to not protest, and to move on. Violence rooted in governments which fail to prosecute gender-motivated killings. Her only option is to migrate for lack of justice and a place to breathe free.
The red is about the blood that women have shed, and the other pieces, artifacts that are on it are about activism. And it's a way for me to honor the activists who do the work. Sometimes it's anonymous work. It's work that's unpaid, and so many of us do it without any acknowledgement. So I wanted to acknowledge the many organizations that actually do the work.
We recognize how much how many years of organizing and speaking out it took to achieve this memorial. And we know that all the women's stories we mentioned at each of the altars also deserve a memorial, and someday will. We're going to, I think there's a presentation of leis for the girls represented here, and I invite them they're going to go ahead and do that. And while they do that, we could just maintain silence and just take a moment to reflect and have your own internal thoughts connecting all the stories that you've heard today.
Yeah, got it.
Commitment. Care. Strength. Women.
And may we leave this place with a commitment for the justice that's yet to be had, for the women that are yet to be found, for the places which are yet to be decolonized.
And I'm here today to join in all the wonderful women from all the communities throughout San Francisco Bay Area to commemorate the International Women's Day. But even just as importantly, I'm here to celebrate the courage of the women who speak out about their suffering because of the rapes and the sexual violence that they have suffered and endured. They are women from many years ago, they're women from now. These are all women who share one thing in common, and that is they wanted to tell the world what happened to them so that the same thing would not happen ever again to any other women.